Peace did not arrive loudly in Tebo's life. It came quietly, like a careful guest that did not want to overstay its welcome. For the first time in years, he woke up without his chest feeling tight. The nightmares had softened. They had not disappeared completely, but they no longer ruled his nights. He had learned something powerful: pain does not vanish when you ignore it, it fades when you face it honestly. Tebo now lived in a modest home on the edge of the city. Not rich, not poor, just enough. Enough space to breathe. Enough light to let the mornings in. Enough silence to hear his own thoughts without fear. Every Thursday evening, he hosted a small community talk at a local center. No cameras. No sponsors. No dramatic speeches. Just people sitting in plastic chairs, sharing truths they had buried for too long. Men who had never cried in front of anyone. Women who had blamed themselves for years. Young people learning early what it took others decades to understand. Tebo never mentioned Naledi by name. He didn't need to. Her shadow still existed in his story, but it no longer controlled the narrative. And that, ironically, was what made his voice so powerful. People trusted him. And where trust grows, attention follows. The email arrived on a Monday morning. Subject line: Your story can save lives, documentary proposal. Tebo almost deleted it. He had learned that not every invitation was an opportunity. Some were traps disguised as praise. But something about the tone made him pause. It was calm, professional, respectful. The sender was a man named Kobelo Radebe. A producer. Well-connected. Known for social impact storytelling. Kobelo praised Tebo's work, not dramatically, not excessively. He spoke about awareness, education, and the importance of authentic voices. He said the documentary would focus on healing, not scandal. On lessons, not blame. At the end of the email, Kobelo wrote one line that stayed with Tebo all day. The truth only changes lives when it reaches people who are still silent. That night, Tebo sat alone, staring at his phone. He had promised himself peace. But peace, he was learning, came with responsibility. After a long pause, he replied, "We can talk." Naledi felt it before she heard it. Something heavy. Something moving. Years had passed since the world turned its back on her. She now lived a quiet life, almost invisible by design. She worked in a small clinic under a different surname. She followed rules strictly. She spoke softly. She avoided attachments. People often said she was reserved. They did not know she was hiding. One afternoon, a colleague mentioned a documentary rumor, something about a man who spoke openly about betrayal, trust, and survival. The details were vague, but Naledi's hands trembled as she poured tea. She didn't ask questions. She didn't need to. That night, she searched online. And there he was. Tebo. Calm. Composed. Oh. She closed the laptop immediately, as if his face could see her through the screen. For years, Naledi had told herself she had accepted her past. But acceptance, she realized, was not the same as accountability. She had learned to live quietly, but she had never truly faced what she had done. And now, the world was listening again. The betrayal begins quietly. Kobelo met Tebo in person a week later. He was charming. Articulate. Well-dressed but not flashy. He listened more than he spoke, something Tebo respected immediately. Kobelo asked thoughtful questions. He did not interrupt. He did not push. That should have been reassuring. But something subtle was off. Kobelo asked about timelines. About dates. About moments that had already been publicly clarified. At first, Tebo assumed it was professionalism. But then Kobelo asked, carefully, "Do you think the audience would understand better if they saw both sides of the story?" Tebo paused. "I don't speak for her," he replied calmly. "I only speak for myself." Kobelo smiled. A little too quickly. "Of course," he said. just asking. The meeting ended on polite terms. But Kobelo made one decision that same evening, without Tebo's knowledge. He reached out to Naledi. Naledi stared at the message for nearly an hour. Kobelo's words were smooth, respectful, and dangerously convincing. He spoke of balance, closure, redemption arcs. He said the world had judged her without hearing her fully. And then he wrote the sentence that cracked something inside her. This may be your only chance to control how history remembers you. Naledi had lived for years believing silence was her punishment. Now, someone was offering her a voice. She told herself it was for healing. She told herself it was for clarity. She told herself she deserved to explain. What she didn't realize was that Kobelo was not interested in healing. He was interested in impact. The documentary shoot began quietly. Tebo noticed changes immediately. Questions became sharper. Edits were requested. Old moments were revisited repeatedly. Then came the call. Just so you know, Kobelo said casually, Naledi has agreed to participate. The room went silent. Tebo didn't raise his voice. He didn't argue. He simply asked one question. Why didn't you tell me first? Kobelo laughed softly. I wanted to surprise you. Authentic reactions matter. That was the moment Tebo understood. This was no longer about truth. It was about control. That night, Tebo sat alone again, just like he had years before. But this time, he was not broken. He was alert. Across the city, Naledi rehearsed what she wasn't sure she believed anymore. And Kobelo. He reviewed footage with a satisfied smile. Because he knew something neither of them did. Peace doesn't attract danger by accident. It attracts people who want to profit from it. And once cameras start rolling, someone always loses control of the story. The first rule Tebo had learned in healing was simple. Not everyone who smiles at your peace wants to protect it. The second rule was harder. Sometimes the danger doesn't come from your enemy, it comes from the one holding the microphone. Tebo did not cancel the documentary. Not because he trusted Kobelo, but because he trusted himself. Years ago, he would have run. He would have disappeared, afraid that reopening old wounds would destroy him again. But pain had already taken its best shot and failed. So instead, he prepared. He reread every consent form. He requested full review rights. He documented conversations. He began keeping a journal again, not for fear, but for clarity. Because truth, when written down, becomes difficult to twist. Still, something gnawed at him. Kobelo had stopped asking about healing. Now he asked about impact. How did it feel when you realized you had been betrayed? Did you ever think about revenge? Would you say what happened ruined your faith in people? Tebo answered calmly, carefully, but he noticed how Kobelo leaned forward only when emotions rose. Pain sold better than peace. Meanwhile, far from the cameras, Kobelo Radebe was not the man he pretended to be. He had once tried to be a filmmaker of substance. Real stories. Real change. But those projects never went far. They were praised, but not watched. Respected, but not funded. Then, years ago, one controversial documentary changed everything. It was messy. Exploitative. Half-truths stitched together for maximum outrage. And it went viral. Awards followed. Sponsorships followed. Influence followed. Kobelo learned his lesson that year. Healing doesn't trend. Conflict does. Since then, he didn't tell stories, he engineered them. Tebo wasn't his subject. Tebo was his stage. Naledi arrived at the studio early on the day of her interview. She wore neutral colors. Minimal makeup. No jewelry. Everything about her appearance whispered one message: I am not the villain you think I am. Kobelo greeted her warmly. Too warmly. You're very brave for doing this, he said. Those words landed deep. For years, Naledi had been called many things, but brave was not one of them. Before filming, Corbello gave her a quiet assurance. "We'll make sure people understand your side. Just be honest. Vulnerable." Naledi nodded, unaware that vulnerability without boundaries is a weapon someone else can use. The camera light blinked on. Naledi began slowly. Carefully. She spoke of loneliness, fear, mistakes. She framed her past as confusion, not intention. Pain, not planning. Corbello nodded sympathetically. Then he asked, "Did you ever feel guilty knowing someone else paid the price?" Naledi froze, just for a second. That second would later be edited into silence. I didn't think it would go that far," she said quietly. Another pause. Another future headline. What would you say to people who believe everything that happened was calculated? Naledi swallowed. "I would say, they don't know the whole story." Corbello smiled behind the camera. That was all he needed. When Tebo later reviewed a rough cut, his chest tightened, not from pain, but from recognition. He had seen manipulation before. Certain answers were replayed. Certain pauses were extended. Certain reactions were isolated. Naledi was being framed as complex, conflicted, human. He was being framed as composed, but distant, controlled, almost cold. And Corbello's voiceover. Neutral on the surface, suggestive underneath. Tebo requested a meeting. "This is not what we discussed," he said calmly. Corbello leaned back. "It's storytelling, Tebo. People need tension. They need truth," Tebo replied. Corbello's tone shifted for the first time. "Truth has angles," he said. "And angles create engagement." That was the moment the mask slipped. The real betrayal. That night, Tebo received a message from someone he trusted deeply. Mama Nondi. She had been contacted. Corbello wanted her perspective. He wanted emotion. He wanted tears. But more than that, he wanted her to question Tebo's choices. "Why didn't you warn people sooner? Did you ignore signs? Do you think your silence allowed harm?" Tebo sat in silence for a long time. This wasn't just a documentary anymore. This was a setup. Corbello wasn't trying to tell a story. He was trying to reshape blame. The turning point. Instead of reacting publicly, Tebo did something unexpected. He stepped back. He stopped interviews. He stopped appearances. He let Corbello believe he was winning. Behind the scenes, Tebo consulted quietly. Legal advice. Media ethics experts. Community leaders who had followed his journey from the beginning. And one of them said something that changed everything. If someone is determined to twist your truth, don't fight them on their stage. Build your own. Tebo nodded. Peace, he realized, does not mean passivity. Corbello finalized the release date. Naledi waited, nervous but hopeful. The public prepared for a story they thought they already understood. And Tebo. He recorded one final message, on his own terms. Not defensive. Not angry. Just honest. Because when truth walks in quietly, lies start to panic. The night the documentary premiered, the city felt unusually quiet. Not because nothing was happening, but because millions of people were about to watch the same story at the same time, each believing they already knew the ending. Tebo sat alone in his living room. No friends. No family. No distractions. Just him, a glass of water, and a screen glowing softly in the dark. He didn't look afraid. He looked ready. The world watches. The opening music was slow. Heavy. Dramatic. Corbello's voice filled the room. This is a story about love, betrayal, and the cost of silence. The montage began. Old photos. Blurred faces. Hospital hallways. A needle rolling across a stainless steel tray. Then Naledi appeared. Her voice cracked at the right moments. Her pauses were perfectly timed. Her eyes shimmered just enough. Social media reacted instantly. Wow. I never saw it like this. She looks genuinely broken. This story is more complicated than we thought. Table watched without blinking. He wasn't angry. He was observing. Halfway through, the narrative shifted. Corbello didn't accuse Table directly. He didn't need to. Instead, he asked questions that lingered. What if silence protects harm? What if good intentions still lead to destruction? Who really holds responsibility? The camera cut to Table, clips from older interviews, carefully chosen. Moments where he paused. Moments where he chose words carefully. To an untrained eye, it looked like restraint. To a manipulated one, it looked like avoidance. And that was Corbello's masterpiece. By the time the credits rolled, the damage had already begun. Hashtags trended. Opinions hardened. Some defended Table fiercely. Others questioned him loudly. But one thing was certain, the piece he had built was under attack. And Corbello smiled behind his screen. The message no one expected. 30 minutes after the documentary ended, something unexpected happened. Table went live. No announcement. No countdown. No dramatic music. Just a simple notification. Table Makona is live. People clicked out of curiosity. They stayed out of shock. He sat in a plain room. White wall. Soft light. No branding. No filters. He looked straight into the camera. I watched the documentary with you, he began. His voice was calm, almost gentle. I want to say something first. I do not hate anyone in this story. Not even those who hurt me. That sentence alone stopped thousands of scrolling thumbs. I also won't argue facts emotionally. Truth doesn't need anger to survive. He took a breath. So tonight, I'm going to do something simple. He held up a folder. Inside were documents. Dates. Records. Test results. Doctor statements. He didn't rush. He didn't dramatize. He explained. The receipts. He clarified timelines. He showed proof of Naledi's diagnosis, dated before they met. He showed legal correspondence from years ago, warnings he had received to stay silent to avoid chaos. He explained the hospital incident calmly, without accusation. I never accused the nurse, he said firmly. That narrative was planted. And it destroyed an innocent woman's life. The comments exploded. People began posting screenshots. Pausing. Rewinding. Comparing. Truth was no longer abstract. It was visible. Then Table said something no one expected. I was advised not to show this. He paused. But I believe healing begins where hiding ends. He played an audio clip. A private conversation. Corbello's voice, clear as day. People don't want closure, Table. They want conflict. Let me do my job. The silence afterward was deafening. Corbello's phone began vibrating uncontrollably. The shift. Within minutes, the narrative flipped. Not slowly. Violently. New hashtags replaced old ones. Wait, did we get played? That edit was manipulative. This changes everything. Influencers deleted posts. Journalists post-scheduled articles. Naledi watched from her apartment, frozen. For the first time in years, she realized something terrifying. She wasn't controlling the story anymore. Corbello issued a statement within the hour. Creative differences. Misinterpretation. Context. But context had escaped him. Once truth steps into the light, spin becomes noise. Sponsors began calling. Platforms began reviewing. Awards committees went silent. The man who wanted the spotlight was now burning under it. As the live stream ended, Table didn't smile. He didn't celebrate. He simply said, "I forgive." But forgiveness doesn't erase accountability. Then he logged off. No victory speech. No hashtags. Just truth, standing on its own. Silence is a dangerous weapon. The city woke up the next morning pretending everything was normal. Cars moved. Shops opened. People laughed. But beneath the surface, something had shifted. Truth had entered the room, and it hadn't asked for permission. Naledi's phone rang all night. She didn't answer a single call. Not from friends. Not from journalists. Not even from Kobelo. By sunrise, her name was everywhere, but her voice was nowhere. And that silence. It wasn't peace. It was strategy. She sat alone in her apartment, curtains drawn, watching the world talk about her without her consent for the first time in her life. Screens replayed Tebo's calm explanations, his documents, his quiet strength. She threw the remote across the room. "No," she whispered. "This is not how my story ends." For years, silence had protected her. Now, silence was suffocating her. Kobelo, on the other hand, chose noise. He went live the very next afternoon. Same confident posture. Same controlled tone. "This has gone too far," he said, staring into the camera. "I'm being attacked for telling a story that needed to be told." He blamed editing teams. He blamed legal advisors. He blamed miscommunication. What he didn't do was take responsibility. And the audience felt it. The comments weren't sympathetic anymore. They were sharp. "You were warned? You had proof and ignored it. This isn't journalism. This is manipulation." Kobelo smiled through it. But his hands were shaking just out of frame. Winning didn't feel like he expected. Tebo sat in his mother's house that evening, staring at nothing. Mama Nondi poured him tea and watched him carefully. "You spoke the truth," she said gently. "Why does it still look heavy on you?" He sighed. "Because truth doesn't give back what it takes, Mama." Friends had stopped calling, not because they doubted him, but because they didn't know how to talk to him anymore. Opportunities were paused. Invitations quietly withdrawn. Silence followed him everywhere. He had cleared his name. But peace had not followed. That night, Naledi made a decision. Not a confession. Not an apology. A counterattack. She contacted a blogger known for exclusive leaks. Someone who didn't verify, only published. By morning, a new headline appeared. Old messages, taken out of context. Half conversations. Speculation framed as insight. Naledi hadn't spoken publicly. But she had spoken just enough. And doubt, once planted, doesn't need truth to grow. The internet did what it always does. It divided. Some stood firm with Tebo. Others leaned into the new uncertainty. Why didn't he speak earlier? Why wait years? Is silence innocence or convenience? Tebo read none of it. He had learned something painful. Defending yourself endlessly is another form of prison. Cornered and panicking, Kobelo made his worst mistake. He released a statement. "I was misled by my primary source," it read. "Certain details were withheld from me." Primary source. Everyone knew who that meant. Naledi saw it and laughed, a dry, hollow laugh. "So that's how this ends," she said to an empty room. "Everyone saves themselves." For the first time, she felt truly alone. Sponsors quietly dropped Kobelo. Platforms flagged the documentary. Investigations opened, not loud, not public, but real. Meanwhile, the nurse from years ago, Tandikeo, finally spoke. Not angrily. Not emotionally. Just truthfully. And people listened. Too late, but they listened. One evening, Tebo stood alone outside his house, watching the sunset. A journalist had asked him earlier that day. Was it worth it? He hadn't answered then. But now, he whispered to himself. Yes. But it cost more than I imagined. Truth had cleared his name, but it had exposed something else. How quickly people turn truth into entertainment. How easily silence becomes a weapon. And how strength is often mistaken for secrecy. Naledi has one option left. Not denial. Not silence. But something far more dangerous. And somewhere in the city, a single decision is about to turn regret into consequence. There were no flashing lights when Naledi finally broke. No microphones. No countdown. No dramatic background music. Just silence. And sometimes, silence is louder than any scream. Naledi didn't call a journalist. She didn't go live. She didn't post a statement. She walked into a small legal office on the edge of the city, heels clicking on tired floors that had had too many confessions to be impressed by hers. The lawyer listened quietly as she spoke. Not emotionally. Not dramatically. Just facts. At first, she framed herself as misunderstood. Then as pressured. Then as afraid. But halfway through, her voice cracked. Not because of guilt. Because of exhaustion. I didn't plan for it to last this long, she whispered. I just wanted control. The lawyer closed the file gently. What you wanted, he said calmly, and what you did are very different things. That was the first time Naledi realized something terrifying. This story was no longer hers to control. Cabello learned the hard way that platforms forgive slowly, but sponsors do not. One meeting. Then another cancellation. Then silence. No emails. No calls returned. The same confidence that once opened doors now made people uncomfortable. He tried to reframe the narrative again. A podcast apology. A carefully worded thread. But something had changed. People didn't want explanations anymore. They wanted accountability. And accountability doesn't trend. It arrives quietly, like a bill you can't ignore. Table's life didn't magically improve. In fact, some days felt heavier than before. But something inside him had shifted. For the first time in years, he slept without questioning his own memory. For the first time, he trusted himself again. One afternoon, he received a message. From the nurse. Tandikeo. Just 5 words. Thank you for not staying silent. He stared at the screen for a long time. And then he cried. Not because of pain. Because healing had finally begun. Naledi thought legal confidentiality would protect her. She was wrong. Not everything leaked. Just enough. A court filing reference. A timeline correction. A quiet confirmation that investigations were ongoing. No names. No accusations. Just truth moving on its own. The public didn't explode. They didn't argue. They nodded. Because deep down, they already knew. One evening, Mama Nondi sat beside her son. You didn't win loudly, she said. But you won cleanly. Table looked at her. I lost years, Mama. She smiled sadly. No, she replied. You survived them. The collapse didn't happen on camera. It happened when Naledi realized no one was chasing her anymore. No outrage. No obsession. No attention. Just distance. Friends stopped calling, not out of anger, but caution. She stared at her phone one night and realized something brutal. Infamy keeps you visible. Accountability leaves you alone. For the first time, she sat with her own choices without distraction. And there was nowhere to run. A letter arrived at Table's house. No return address. Inside was a single line. I'm sorry for what I took from you. No signature. He folded it carefully and placed it in a drawer. Not as forgiveness. Not as closure. But as proof that truth eventually reaches everyone even when no one is watching. Some collapses are quiet. But they are permanent. Thank you for watching Untold African Stories. If this story touched your heart, please like, share, and subscribe so these lessons can reach more lives. Until next time. Stay strong, stay wise, and remember, every truth will rise. Untold African Stories, signing off.